The coffee pot felt heavy in Leah's hand, heavier than its 10-cup capacity. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the plastic handle, a tremor running up her arm that had nothing to do with the weight of the dark liquid sloshing inside. It was the man in booth 4 and the girl beside him. He looked like anyone. A salesman, maybe. Faded blue polo shirt, cheap watch, a face that was utterly forgettable. But his hands weren't. They were clean, manicured, and they moved with a crisp, unnerving precision. One rested on the teenage girl's forearm, not gripping, just resting. A claim. The girl, maybe 15, stared at the laminated menu with an intensity that suggested she was trying to decipher ancient runes, not choose between pancakes and a Western omelet. Her hair, a cascade of dark waves, fell over her face, a curtain she seemed desperate to hide behind. "She'll have the French toast," the man said, his voice as bland as his shirt. He didn't look at Leah. His eyes were on the girl. "And a glass of milk. I'll have the lumberjack slam. Coffee, black." Leah's pen froze over her notepad. The girl hadn't looked up, hadn't made a sound. Her shoulders were hunched, a turtle pulled tight into its shell. Leah forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Sure thing. French toast and a lumberjack. Be right back with that coffee." She turned, her waitress sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense bubble that surrounded that booth. She could feel his eyes on her back as she walked away. It wasn't a leer. It was an assessment, a predator gauging a potential threat in its environment. Back behind the counter, her hands shook as she poured his coffee. Old Sal, the cook, eyed her from over the grill. "You all right, kid? See a ghost?" Leah just nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd worked at the 24/7 highway diner for a year, ever since she turned 18. She'd seen it all. Drunks, lovers' quarrels, exhausted truckers on their fourth refill. But this felt different. This felt cold. It was the way the girl's body was held in a state of permanent flinch, the way the man's presence sucked all the air out of that corner of the room. She delivered the coffee, placing it carefully on the table. The man's hand was still on the girl's arm. He moved it only to pick up his cup, and in that moment, the girl's head lifted just enough for Leah to see her eyes. They were wide, terrified, and they held a silent, desperate plea that shot straight through Leah's chest. Then just as quickly, her gaze dropped back to the menu she wasn't reading. The curtain fell. It was a snapshot, a half-second of pure, undiluted fear. And it was enough. Something was terribly wrong. Instinct is a funny thing. It's not a thought. It's a feeling, a deep, primal hum that vibrates somewhere behind your ribs. It's the voice of 1,000 ancestors whispering a single word. Danger. We spend our modern lives learning to ignore it, telling ourselves we're overreacting, being silly. Have you ever had that feeling? That sudden, ice-cold certainty that the scene in front of you is all wrong, even if you can't explain why? It's a powerful gift, that instinct. Don't ever let anyone convince you to ignore it. If you believe in the power of trusting your gut, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Have you ever noticed something everyone else missed? Leah's gut was screaming. She busied herself at the service station, wiping down an already clean counter, her eyes flicking to the mirror that gave her a distorted view of the dining room. Booth 4 was an island of suffocating silence. The man talked in a low, even murmur, but the girl never answered. When Sal put the plates up in the window, Leah took a deep breath before carrying them over. She set the food down. The lumberjack slam for him, a mountain of eggs, bacon, and sausage. The French toast for her, dusted with powdered sugar. The man picked up a knife and fork. Leah expected him to start on his own meal. Instead, he reached over to the girl's plate. With swift, economical movements, he cut her French toast into small, perfect squares, like you would for a toddler. The girl watched, her hands limp in her lap. She didn't touch her fork until he nudged the plate an inch closer to her. "Eat," he said. The word was soft, but it landed like a stone. Leah retreated again, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every detail was another brushstroke in a horrifying picture. The lack of choice, the physical control, the infantilizing act of cutting her food. This wasn't a father and daughter. This was a jailer and his prisoner. The bell over the door jingled, a familiar, welcome sound. A gust of cool evening air swept in, carrying the scent of leather and road dust. Grizz and his boys, the Blacktop Saints, To most people, they were a terrifying sight. 6 large men in worn leather vests, their faces weathered, their beards unruly. But to Leah, they were part of the diner's rhythm. They came in every Tuesday night like clockwork, on their way back from their chapter meeting. They were loud, they drank gallons of coffee, and they always tipped well. Grizz, the club president, was a mountain of a man with a voice like gravel tumbling downhill. He nodded to Leah as they shuffled into their usual spot, the big round booth at the back. "Evening, Leah. The usual." "Coming right up, Grizz," she said, her voice steadier now. Their presence was an anchor, a solid, rumbling counterweight to the silent menace in booth 4. She got their order, a pot of coffee, a slice of apple pie for Grizz, Cherry for his second in command, a quiet man they called Preacher. As she moved between their booth and the kitchen, she kept booth 4 in her peripheral vision. The man ate his meal methodically. The girl picked at her perfect squares of French toast, each bite looking like it took a monumental effort. Then the girl spoke. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the clatter of the diner. "May I use the restroom?" The man chewed his bacon, considering it. He looked at his watch. He scanned the diner. His eyes lingered on the bikers for a moment before dismissing them as harmless background noise. Finally, he gave a curt nod. 5 minutes. It wasn't permission. It was a parole. The girl slid out of the booth, her movements stiff. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor as she walked toward the back hallway where the restrooms were. She passed Leah without a glance, but as she did, Leah saw it. The slightest turn of her head, a flicker of her eyes toward the biker's booth. It was nothing. It was everything. The man in booth 4 didn't take his eyes off the hallway entrance. He wasn't eating. He was waiting, counting. The fork in his hand was still. 1 minute passed. 2. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Leah found herself holding her breath, her world shrinking to the space between that man and the restroom door. 3 minutes. The man's jaw tightened. He placed his fork down with a soft click. His hand went to his jacket pocket, resting there. Leah's mind raced. What was she supposed to do? Scream? Call the cops and say what? A man is acting weird? They'd think she was crazy. 4 minutes. The restroom door opened. The girl emerged, her face pale, her hands clasped in front of her. She walked back to the booth, her gaze once again glued to the floor. She slid back in, a puppet returning to its box. The man visibly relaxed. He picked up his fork and resumed eating as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Leah knew it. She had to check. "Need a refill over here, sweetheart," Grizz's voice rumbled from the back. "On my way," she called out, grabbing the coffee pot. It was the excuse she needed. She walked toward the biker's booth, her path taking her right past the entrance to the restroom hallway. On her way there, she glanced in. Nothing. Just a tiled floor. But on her way back, after refilling their cups and sharing a brief, forced smile, she looked again. This time she saw it, tucked into the narrow space between the trash can and the wall. A small folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. It was a napkin, folded into a tiny, tight square. Her heart leaped into her throat. Time seemed to warp, the diner's friendly chatter fading into a distant buzz. The man was watching her. She couldn't bend down. She couldn't draw attention to it. She had to act normal. She continued to the biker's booth. "Anything else for you guys?" "We're good for now, darling," Preacher said, his eyes kind. She nodded and turned, her mind spinning. How could she get it? If she bent down, the man would see. He would know. The potential consequences sent a wave of nausea through her. She walked past the hallway again, heading for an empty table to clear the dishes. Her brain was a frantic whir of bad ideas. Spill a drink? Too obvious. Drop a tray? Too dramatic. She needed a reason to be on the floor in that exact spot. A natural reason. As she stacked plates, her eyes scanned her own uniform, her apron pocket, her pen. An idea, fragile and terrifying, began to form. She walked back toward the kitchen, her route once again taking her past the crucial spot. As she neared the hallway, she let her hand brush against the side of the trash can. Her fingers fumbled with the pen in her apron. She let it slip. It clattered onto the floor, rolling to a stop just inches from the folded napkin. Perfect. Now for the hard part. She had to pick it up. She took a breath, her lungs feeling tight and small. She knelt down, her back to the man in booth 4, shielding her actions from his view. Her body was a wall between him and the secret on the floor. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The linoleum was cold against her knees. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the white square of the napkin. Her fingers closed around the pen. Then, in a movement so swift she barely registered it, her other hand shot out, snatching the napkin, crumpling it into her palm. She stood up, her legs wobbly. She shoved both the pen and the crumpled napkin deep into her apron pocket. She didn't look at booth 4. She walked straight to the kitchen, pushed through the swinging doors, and leaned against the stainless steel counter, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sal looked up from a sizzling burger. "You dropped something." Leah could only nod, her hand pressed against her pocket. The crumpled paper felt like a burning coal against her hip. She took a shaky breath and pulled it out, her back to the door. Her fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, unfolded the diner napkin. Scrawled in shaky, desperate letters were 2 words: "Help me." The world tilted. The 2 words were a scream trapped on paper. All the ambiguity, all the self-doubt, vanished. This was real. The girl was in danger, and now Leah was the only person who knew. She stared at the note, the letters blurring. Her first thought was to call 911. But what would she say? She had a note. The man would deny it. He'd say the girl was a runaway, his troubled niece, anything. He would be calm and plausible. Leah would be a hysterical waitress. They might separate them for a minute, but if the girl was too scared to talk, they'd let him go. And then what? What would he do to that girl and to Leah for trying? Her fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in her stomach. He was right out there, watching, waiting. He'd given the girl 5 minutes. He was meticulous. He was in control. If Leah made a wrong move, he would know. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, landing on the swinging door. Through its small, greasy window, she could see the back of Grizz's head. The Blacktop Saints. They were loud and rough, but they were also steady. Grizz had once spent 20 minutes helping an old woman change a flat tire in the parking lot in the pouring rain. Preacher organized a toy drive every Christmas. They weren't the monsters people thought they were. They were her only other option. A terrible, risky option, but better than nothing. She had to get the note to them. But how? The man's gaze was fixed on the dining room. He saw everything. If she walked over and handed it to them, he'd see. He would be on his feet, grabbing the girl, and out the door before anyone could react. She needed a way to do it without him noticing. A moment of distraction, a perfect excuse. The man in booth 4 raised his hand. A small, polite gesture. He wanted the check. It was time. The window of opportunity was closing. Leah took one last, steadying breath, crumpled the napkin back into a tight ball in her fist, and pushed through the kitchen doors. The friendly diner noise washed over her, but it couldn't touch the cold knot of fear in her gut. She printed his check, placed it on a small tray, and walked toward the booth. Her steps felt deliberate, each one a countdown. "Here you are," she said, her voice miraculously even. She placed the tray on the table. The man didn't look at the bill. He looked at her. His eyes were flat, devoid of emotion, but they saw everything. He pulled a wallet from his back pocket, took out 2 $50 bills, and placed them on the tray. The meal was maybe $30. "This is for you," he said, his voice a low murmur, "for your excellent service and for your discretion." The last 2 words hung in the air between them. It wasn't a tip, it was a bribe, a warning. "I saw you. I know you suspect. This is your chance to forget it." Leah's blood ran cold. He knew. He must have seen something. The fumbled pen, the extra second on the floor. He was testing her, buying her silence. Her mind screamed, "Take the money. Forget the note. It's not your problem. You're a 19-year-old waitress, not a cop." She looked from his empty eyes to the girl, who was staring at her own hands, trembling in her lap. The silent plea Leah had seen in her eyes earlier echoed in her memory. "Help me." She couldn't. She just couldn't. "The pie is on the house for regulars," she heard herself say, her voice sounding distant. She gestured vaguely toward the biker's booth. "I need to go drop this off for them." It was a clumsy lie, but it was the only thing she could think of to explain her next move. She picked up the tray with the $100, her hand clenched around the napkin in her apron pocket. She turned her back on the man and his money and walked toward the Blacktop Saints. Every step was an agony of suspense. She expected a hand on her shoulder, his cold voice in her ear. But nothing happened. She reached the biker's booth, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. Grizz looked up from his pie, a question in his eyes. "You guys forgot this," she said, her voice shaking. She held out the small tray from the man's table, with his check and his $100 on it. It made no sense, but she was past the point of logic. Grizz frowned. "That ain't ours, Leah." "I know," she whispered, her eyes darting toward booth 4. The man was watching. He was still sitting, but he was poised, ready to move. "Please, just take it." Preacher, sitting beside Grizz, saw the terror in her face. He saw the way her eyes kept flicking back to the other booth. He understood. He reached out and took the tray. "Our mistake," Preacher said, his voice calm and steady, covering for her. "Thanks for bringing it over." As he took the tray, Leah's other hand, the one that had been hidden in her apron, moved. In the split second of the handoff, under the cover of the tray, she pressed the crumpled napkin into Preacher's palm. It was a clumsy, desperate exchange. Over in an instant. His fingers closed around it, his expression never changing. She pulled her hands back, nodding dumbly. "No problem." She turned and walked away, her legs feeling like water. She didn't go back to booth 4. She went to the service station, her back to the entire room, and started polishing silverware that was already gleaming. She could feel the man's stare burning into her spine. She could feel the weight of what she had just done. She had passed the point of no return. The secret was no longer hers alone. Behind her, at the round booth, Preacher slid the tray onto the table. Under the cover of the table's edge, he looked down at his hand and uncurled his fingers. He saw the crumpled napkin. He glanced at Grizz. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. With a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, Preacher flattened the napkin on his lap, below the man's line of sight. Grizz leaned forward, pretending to reach for a sugar packet. He glanced down. He saw the two words, "Help me." Grizz's face, a landscape of wrinkles and scars, did not change. He didn't gasp. He didn't curse. He simply leaned back in his seat, his gaze becoming distant, thoughtful. The jovial atmosphere at their table didn't vanish, but it thinned, replaced by a silent, sharp-edged focus. He looked over at booth 4. He saw the bland-faced man, now watching Leah with an unnerving stillness. He saw the terrified girl, huddled into herself. He looked at Leah, who was scrubbing a coffee pot with frantic energy, her shoulders rigid with tension. He put all the pieces together, the girl's fear, the man's controlling presence, Leah's bizarre behavior with the tray, her white-knuckled terror, and now the note. It all clicked into place. Grizz took a slow sip of his coffee. He set the mug down with a soft thud. Then he gave a nearly imperceptible nod to the man on his right, a burly biker named Tiny. Tiny didn't say a word. He simply pushed a half-eaten piece of pie away, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood up. He stretched, yawning theatrically, and ambled toward the front of the diner. He didn't go to the door. He went to the jukebox, which stood near the entrance, and started flipping through the selections as if he had all the time in the world. But his position was strategic. He was now casually, deniably, blocking the most direct path to the exit. At the same time, Grizz caught the eye of another member, a wiry man called Stitch. He tilted his head slightly toward the back hallway. Stitch nodded, stood, and headed for the restrooms. He wasn't just going to the bathroom. He was securing the other exit. The man in booth 4 saw it. His mask of calm didn't slip, but a new tension entered his posture. He had been watching Leah, but now his attention was divided. He scanned the room, his gaze flicking from Tiny at the jukebox to the empty seat where Stitch had been. He put his napkin on the table. It was a signal. He was preparing to leave. Grizz pulled out his phone. He kept it low, below the table, his large frame shielding it from view. His thumb moved across the screen, dialing 3 numbers. He lifted the phone to his ear, his eyes locked on the man in booth 4. "Yeah," Grizz's voice was low and even, a quiet rumble. "I'm at Sal's Diner on Route 9. Got a situation here. Potential kidnapping. Booth 4. He listened for a moment. "Yeah, he's with a girl. Teenager. Looks scared to death." The man in booth 4 was on his feet now. He threw the $100 from the tray onto the table. "We're leaving," he said to the girl. He grabbed her arm, this time with a brutal firmness that made her wince. He started pulling her out of the booth. "Sir?" Grizz's voice cut through the diner's chatter. It wasn't loud, but it had the authority of a landslide. "I don't think you've finished your coffee." The man froze. He turned slowly to face Grizz. The mask was gone. His face was a sheet of cold fury. This is none of your business, old man. A scared kid is everybody's business, Grizz said, his voice dropping even lower. He hadn't moved from his seat, but he seemed to fill the entire room. Tiny, by the jukebox, turned slightly, his arms crossed over his massive chest. At the other end of the aisle, another biker had stood up to stretch his legs, effectively blocking the path to the kitchen. They had him boxed in, a quiet, informal, inescapable cage. The man's eyes darted between them, calculating. He saw the phone in Grizz's hand. He understood. His grip on the girl's arm tightened, pulling her closer to him as a shield. "Let us walk out of here," he said, his voice a venomous hiss. "Let us walk, and no one gets hurt." Leah watched, frozen behind the counter. Her breath was trapped in her lungs. Sal stood beside her, a heavy meat tenderizer clutched in his hand. The entire diner had fallen silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerators and the distant wail of a siren, growing steadily closer. The sound of the siren broke the spell. The man's face twisted in a snarl of pure rage. He shoved the girl forward, trying to break through the human barrier. But Preacher was on his feet in an instant, stepping into his path. Preacher wasn't as big as Grizz or Tiny, but he moved with a solid, immovable grace. "I don't think so, friend," Preacher said, his voice still calm, but his eyes were like chips of ice. The wail grew into a shriek as two police cruisers swerved into the parking lot, their lights painting the diner in strobing flashes of red and blue. It was over. The man saw it, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He let go of the girl's arm, his hands raising slowly into the air as two officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. The moment he let her go, the girl stumbled away from him, collapsing into a heap on the floor, her body finally releasing all the terror she had held inside. She sobbed, deep, gut-wrenching sounds of relief and trauma. Leah didn't even think. She ran from behind the counter, skidding to her knees on the linoleum beside the girl. She put her arms around her, holding her tight. "It's okay," Leah whispered over and over again, rocking her gently. "It's okay. You're safe now. You're safe." The girl clung to her, a drowning person finding a life raft. Through her tears, she managed to choke out a single word. "Thank you." The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, crackling radios, and quiet professional voices. The man whose name was revealed to be a bland alias for a wanted felon with a history of similar crimes was taken away in handcuffs, his face once again an emotionless mask. The girl, Maya, was wrapped in a blanket by a kind-faced female officer. Grizz and his men gave their statements quietly, downplaying their role. "The waitress noticed something was off," Grizz told the lead officer, gesturing with his thumb toward Leah. "She's the one with good instincts. We just made sure nobody left before you boys got here." When the chaos subsided and Maya was being led to an ambulance to be checked over, she stopped. She turned and looked at Leah, who was standing by the counter, still trembling. Maya walked over, the oversized police blanket trailing behind her. She wrapped her arms around Leah's waist and hugged her with a strength that was surprising. "You saved my life," she whispered into Leah's apron. Leah could only hug her back, tears finally streaming down her own face. "I'm so glad you're okay." Over the next few years, the story of that night at Sal's Diner became a quiet legend. It didn't make national news, but it changed everything for the people involved. Maya, it turned out, had been snatched from a mall parking lot 2 states away 3 days earlier. Her parents, who had been living a nightmare, were reunited with her that night. Leah didn't remain just a waitress. A few months after the incident, Grizz and the Blacktop Saints showed up at the diner. They sat in their usual booth, and Grizz called her over. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "What's this?" Leah asked, confused. "It's from us," Grizz said, "and from a few other people. A very grateful family, for one." Inside was a check with enough zeros on it to make her dizzy. "It's a reward officially. Unofficially, it's a down payment. Sal's looking to retire. He thinks the place would be in good hands." 2 years later, the sign outside read, "Leah's Place." The Blacktop Saints were still her regulars, but now they weren't just customers. They were her uncles, her protectors, her family. She'd go to their Christmas toy drives and summer barbecues. Tiny taught her how to change her oil. Preacher helped her with her taxes. Maya never forgot. She sent a postcard every month from her new life, first from high school, then from college, where she was studying to be a social worker. Every postcard ended the same way: "Because of you." On the 5th anniversary of that night, Maya, now a confident young woman of 20, walked back into the diner. Leah was behind the counter, a few more laugh lines around her eyes, but the same watchful gaze. Grizz and the boys were in their booth. Maya slid onto a stool at the counter. "I'll have the French toast," she said, a small, knowing smile on her face, "and I'll cut it myself." Leah laughed, a sound of pure joy. She brought over the plate, and later, when the bikers were getting ready to leave, she brought out a tray of coffee cups for a final toast. Grizz raised his mug. "To good instincts," he rumbled. "To paying attention," Preacher added. Maya lifted her water glass. "And to the heroes who work in diners," she said, her eyes locked on Leah's. Leah raised her own cup, her hand perfectly steady. "To found family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "One person's courage can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can never fully predict." Leah was just a waitress, but she chose to listen to that small, quiet voice that said something was wrong. She chose to act, even when she was terrified. That choice saved a life, built a family, and turned a greasy spoon into a sanctuary. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear a stained apron and carry a coffee pot. They are the people who see, who listen, and who refuse to look away. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their attention matters. And subscribe for more stories that prove courage is everywhere, waiting to be seen.